Hey guys, I now have an official favourite move in chess, and it actually features in this game. This is something that I've been looking out for recently, and I got the chance to play it, so let me share this game with you. I have the white pieces, my opponent's rated 1470, 1480, and we have a Scandinavian. Now, I know the Scandinavian is classic, it's kind of solid, people play it at all kinds of levels, but this line I just don't understand, and if you can explain it to me then fair enough. Okay, so you have to capture the pawn in the middle, queen recaptures. This is not the line that I play. If I play the Scandi, I normally play knight to f6 on the second move instead of recapturing the pawn. And of course, knight to c3 is the only move. It comes with tempo, kicks the queen, has to be played. So quite often you'll get this queen to a5 line, but queen to d8, look, I know this is book, but I just don't get it, because now I get to develop my second knight, and now I have control, complete control of the four central squares, right? I've got two pieces developed in the board, and black has done nothing whatsoever in the first three moves. I don't get it. Okay, so now c6, bishop to c4. Obviously, bishop can't go there, the kind of Spanish position. This is the Italian position for the bishop. I'm now ready to castle, and life is good. Knight now to f6. And here I thought about playing d3, where it's defended by the pawn, it defends the bishop. That's probably very, very solid. I decided to push d4 instead. It's still defended twice by queen and knight, but I just felt like, you should be pushing forward for the central control. Anyway, so now we have bishop to g4 pinning my knight. And now I decide to roll out my favourite move, my official favourite move. And it's because the bishop is here. Okay, so the threat of the bishop is, if this knight moves, it can capture my queen. Well, it can, unless black is in check. Okay, so what is the favourite move? What did I play next? If you've been watching the last couple of days, bishop takes f7 check. I'm going to have bishop takes f7 check t-shirts made. This is so cool. We see this in lots of different lines, lots of different kinds of openings. So the king's in check. There are only two legal moves: either take the bishop or come up here to d7. I mean, there's no option. King takes bishop. And now knight to e5 with check. Okay, the knight cannot be captured, so the king is going to have to move. King moves, I get the bishop. And I am basically only a pawn up at this point in material, because I sacked my own bishop here, and I've won a bishop back. Obviously, if knight takes, that just invites my queen out into the board, and that's not going to end pretty for black. Now we have knight to d7, and I capture the knight. We have a trade of knights. Okay, what's not to like? I mean, I'm ready to castle here. I've got dark squared bishop, knight, queen, so material is actually fairly equal, but big differences. One, black's king has been forced to move, so cannot castle. So it's going to be tough to get both of these rooks engaged in the game. Two, he's got a nasty isolated pawn on the e-file. Okay, so things are looking all right. So I castle, obviously. Queen d7 now, so I know what he's doing. He wants to put his rook behind here and wants to come after this pawn. Fair enough. I think I can cover that, because I know I've got bishop e3. I know I've got knight e2 if I wanted. Both of those defend the pawn, and then after that I can also push c3 as well. So I think the pawn's good. I have time to defend the pawn. So rook to e1, pinning this guy against the king. Rook comes across, obviously. Bishop e3. The other rook moves to g8, just lining up with my king. I lift my queen to d3 now, maybe preparing to put my other rook behind the queen. Because my opponent's king hasn't castled yet, it is important to focus on attacking in the center of the board. We want to open up this space in the middle of the board and just emphasize black's weakness. Okay, you want to really make black pay. Okay, so now g6 is played, so I'm guessing he's getting ready to put his bishop there or there. I centralize my rook, he puts his bishop on g7. So when he moves his knight now, he's going to have bishop, then queen, then rook attacking this pawn. This knight can't attack this pawn anytime soon. 2 diagonals for a knight takes a long time to complete. It actually takes 1, 2, 2, 3, 4 moves for a knight to move 2 diagonals. All right. Now, so what I decide to do is move my bishop, pin the knight. Well, it's not really a pin, but pinned against this pawn. So basically, if this knight moves now, it is effectively a pin. I've got rook takes e7, attacking the king and the queen, winning. So the king now moves. I throw in a check with queen to c4. I'm still defending the pawn. And black here decides to play e6. And now I maneuver my knight around. We've got 2 attackers on this pawn and still 2 defenders. So the pawn is fine. I now figure if knight takes knight, I grab the rook. Okay. If knight doesn't take, I could grab the knight with knight or whatever, you know, just, it looks good. But here, this is a really, really fascinating maneuver. Okay, knight takes knight, bishop takes rook. Okay, now I thought about this. I thought knight takes knight, and I thought, look, I do have rook takes knight. Okay, and I've restored my 1 pawn advantage, and black still has a problem here, and my pawn's still defended twice. So that's not a big issue, and maybe I could bring my rook over as well to the f-file. Okay, I decide to grab the rook. I don't see the problem with that, but here's the problem with that. The knight now gets out of trouble. The knight now runs away, and my bishop is under attack by rook and queen, but also the knight is attacking my queen. So really, really good move here by black. Really good move. I have to do something about this. I just drop my queen back now to b3, and my bishop falls. So effectively, what's happened there is I've lost my 1 pawn advantage. But the situation now is I have a pair of rooks. Black has a rook and 2 minor pieces. But I'm still 1 pawn up, and he still has this isolated pawn problem. So now I decide, well, what I want to do is I really want to play c3. Close this bishop off. But what I don't want is I don't want my queen stuck on the wrong side of this pawn chain. So I think the right thing to do now is queen f3 check, then prepare to play c3 afterwards when my queen is on the action side of the board, which is where my opponent's king is. So king retreats, c3. Knight comes up, and now I add a second attacker to this pawn here. This pawn is a vulnerability. It's isolated. There's no f pawn that can defend it, and there's no d pawn that can defend it. So what does black do? Push the pawn. So now we have the option of an exchange of queens. I go for that option. Then I grab the pawn, and we have a trade of rooks. Okay. Knight grabs the pawn. Now, interesting situation. I have 2 3s, right? Black has a 3 and a 2, so I've got a 1 pawn advantage, but he has 2 minor pieces against a rook. Now, in general, 2 minor pieces is better than a rook. I mean, nominally they're worth 6, or rook's worth 5, but as always, it depends on the board. Now, a couple of things. I could put all of my pawns onto light squares if I wanted. Okay, and then this bishop is ghosted. This bishop can't touch my pawns at all. Plus, for example, I could put my rook on, say, something like e2 and defend the rearmost pawns in my light squared pawn structure. And the knight, if my rook's on a light square, the bishop can't touch it, so he's only got a knight. And then all I need to do is kind of centralize my king on the light squares, and I should be good. So here I play f4, attack the knight, knight moves, attack the knight again, knight comes back. Okay, so he could have thought about knight b2 and attack my rook, but then I have this, rook d8, and either he blocks with his bishop and keeps his bishop stuck in the game, then I can come after this pawn, you know, and just really start to hoover up those pawns. So here the knight retreats, and I simply push c4. This does a couple of really good things. It means I have a light squared pawn chain on the queen side there, so this bishop cannot touch those pawns. Doesn't matter how many times it zips around, that bishop is constrained to the dark squares on the board. It can only land on 32 of the 64 squares, plus it takes this square away from the knight, so the knight now cannot proceed forwards, right? So black now plays king to d7, I play my rook to d7. I can't put my rook here with check because the knight's guarding it, but the idea is simply to come back here and start gobbling up pawns like Pac-Man. Okay, bishop attacks the rook, I come here, and now black resigns. Because he can see what's coming, right? The rook is incredibly strong on this board, and you need to understand why the rook is so good, okay? So the bishop is compromised because, I mean, I can either put my pawns on dark squares, which means that the bishop can't go there, right? And it can only attack the rearmost pawn, which my king could guard, okay? I've got a 3-on-2 pawn majority on this side of the board, so my king could shepherd these pawns up the board, but there's absolutely no way of defending this backwards light pawn. It just can't be defended. If the knight goes there, I grab the pawn and pin the knight anyway, I'm going to grab this pawn. It's all going to be over very quickly. But yeah, just good game there, and wonderful to get in my new favourite move. Bishop takes f7 check. So there's great things you can do with this. I mean, one of them is the Haxo Gambit. I'm not going to go into a bunch of things, but let me show you, for example, we'll go into the Explorer. Okay, and my games. My games is white. So the Haxo Gambit, for example, I've got videos on this. Comes from the Scotch opening. Right, so the Scotch is where you play d4. This is, yeah, I've played this a lot from this king's knight position. Okay, bishop c4 is the Italian opening. Bishop b5 is the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish. I have played knight to c3 in the past. I've played d3, which is very, very quiet and boring. But the Scotch is great fun. So the Scotch starts with d4, and what happens is if black captures on d4, which is by far the most common move, I've got a 58 against 40 win rate here. You then play the Scotch Gambit, I think, with bishop to c4. So you ignore the captured pawn, and we're going for rapid development and rapid attack. So then the next move, I believe, if he plays bishop c5, right? Maybe that's not the move. But the Haxo Gambit then proceed. Oh yeah, no, then you play c3. Okay, so c3 tempting this. Okay, and that's what you want to see. This is the Haxo Gambit. Okay, so the next move now is bishop takes f7 check. Officially the best move in chess. Right? Again, the king's in check. He can either weasel here or weasel there, but by far the most common, 30 times out of 37, we've had king takes. And then you play queen to d5, hitting both the king and the bishop, and the king again has to move. There's no way to block the attack, king has to move. King e8 is the most common that I've seen, and now actually what I do is I throw in queen h5, just for good measure. The bishop's still there, the bishop's at my mercy, so this is another fork on king and bishop, but this prompts this move, and then you take the bishop, and this rook is now in trouble. So if the pawn takes there, you've got bishop takes, and then that's just, you know, the rook is really in serious danger here. Okay, so lots and lots of fun. If you've got other games, I shared one the other day from a follower who played it in the Danish Gambit as well, which was really, really interesting to see. I don't know if I can recreate that, but we'll have a quick go. So centre game, takes, bishop out, takes, the full Danish. And then I think, didn't he play something silly like this? And then bishop takes. And then it was something weird, like he pushed that. Right? And now bishop takes f7. And again, the king can't capture the bishop because the king is the only defender of the queen. So the king has to move here. Right? And maybe something like that. You know, another check. Again, the king can't capture there. And the king is in check. It's just horrible, 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 horrible. But don't forget this move. Don't forget this bishop sacrifice on f7. Or if you're black, on f2. It can lead to some very, very interesting positions. So there you go. Thanks for watching. See you later.